Good morning, evening, or afternoon, everybody. It is me, your boy TPT, coming at you not live and not from Twitch TV. So, we are going to be doing yet another of our EU4 beginner guides videos. Now, I'm probably going to do maybe 1 to 2 more of these, and then after that, I'm actually going to start looking at more advanced guides. You know, just the potential for doing them. I'm not guaranteeing yet, nor am I saying what we'll be making them on. Just that, I'd like to consider it as an option, because I have had a lot of fun making these. I feel like realistically, there's quite a lot of beginner guides, but I've found a distinct lack of advanced guides on YouTube and other media sources. I mean. So I'd like to consider the potential for that, actually. Anyway, so you might recognize this game. This is our Tunis game that we've been playing on stream the past 2 days at twitch.tv/twinsplaytechit. But before we obviously get into the specifics, I would first of all like to give out my usual shout-outs to the EU4 Casual Discord and the EU4 Australia Discord. Both great places to hang out. Obviously, the EU4 Australia Discord is mainly designed for Australians, whereas the EU4 Casuals focuses specifically on North America as well as Europe. So be sure to check it out. In particular, EU4 Casuals does also do other games as well. They have Hoi games, they have Minecraft. In fact, I also stream on their Minecraft server quite a bit. It's run by Lunatic, he's one of the boys. Anyway, let's just jump into it. So, today's topic is actually going to be about military tactics. This will sort of cover a bit of both multiplayer and single player, with probably a slight emphasis on multiplayer, but not like a heavy emphasis. Again, I am aiming to try and sort of to cover both topics in this. So anyway, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at, drum roll please. First of all, we're going to be doing army compositions. So, obviously, armies in EU4, pretty important, right? It's all about fighting and conquering after all. That is the main focus of it, along with, a bit of exploration and expansion, etc. Blah, 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 blah. You kill stuff, you gain land, and that's how you win. So, when you're killing stuff, you want to be making sure that you're killing it efficiently. Now, there's a couple stats that you probably want to look at. Most of them are located over in the military tab here. As you can see, this covers pretty much everything we need to know. So, the first important one we're going to be looking at is the combat width. Now, the combat width has a base stat of, I believe it's about 20 off the top of my head. If you give me 1 second, actually I can check. No, it's 15, sorry. So it has base stat of 15. Now, this is essentially when you go to fight a battle, alright? When you go to fight a battle, you will have a combat width assigned to that battle. I'll see if I have any active ones at the moment, but I don't see any, unfortunately. But you'll have a given combat width for that battle. And that essentially determines how many units or regiments you can have fighting at one time. Now, there are 2 rows in that combat width. You'll have the front row and the back row. So that's an important distinction to make, alright? You've also got, obviously, your 3 types. You've got your infantry, your cavalry, and your artillery. So infantry and cavalry can only fight from the front row. However, artillery can fight from both the front and the back row, and particularly when they're fighting on the front row, they both take and deal double damage. So that is something important to note. Now, first of all, what you want to do is, as soon as possible, you want to be filling out the entirety of this combat with artillery. So, now, unfortunately, I'm a poor country right now, and I'll go into details about that in a second. But essentially, what you want is your combat stacks to be at least 25 infantry currently and 25 artillery. Now, realistically, that's pretty optimistic. Typically, it doesn't really tend to come into effect until around Tech 13. when artillery receives a significant buff. But you know, it can be used before that as well. It just depends on if you have the economy. Like for example, Tunis is dirt poor, but if I was playing something like say France, this is an AI France obviously, but you know, if you're a player, you'd be making a lot more money. But I would be rocking, you know, I would be rocking as many cannons as possible. As you can see, they have 12 cannons, way too much cavalry, and a bunch of infantry as well. So again, essentially, you want to be filling out this combat width. So typically, what will happen is, specifically in multiplayer, in single player, this doesn't tend to matter as much, but what will happen in multiplayer is you'll have 1 to 2 stacks of 25 infantry and 25 cannons in the one stack, and then you'll have a number of additional stacks which are just plain infantry. So the one with 25 and 25, that's what's called your siege stack. So that'll be placed on your front lines with your generals equipped on it. Then you'll have your infantry only stacks arrayed behind that siege stack, and as the battle proceeds and you begin to lose your front line, you use those infantry only stacks to reinforce the battle, as having extra cannons in those infantry stacks won't mean anything because the cannons will not fight. The infantry is always prioritized on the front line until your front line breaks, in which case the cannons will then be placed onto the front line. So essentially, you want as many siege stacks as you intend on fighting battles, and then you want all the rest to be infantry. Typically, I rock about 2 siege stacks and then all the rest infantry, so I would probably have about, again, obviously it's quite early, so economy means you probably wouldn't, but say we were using this 25 combat width, I'd be rocking 2 stacks of 25, and then all the rest would be infantry, because again, that is how you're reinforcing those battles, and that's how you're making sure that your front line stays intact. Now, regarding that, you have to be very careful about your front line as well. You need to make sure that you're sending those stacks in time, because if your front line breaks, even if you send in those additional infantry stacks, some of your cannons will still be placed on the front line and will then not proceed to move. So you have to make sure that you're getting those infantry stacks in time. You can't wait too long, but you also don't want to put them in too early as well, because even if your infantry is not actively engaged in the fight, they will still take morale damage from the casualties being inflicted. Now, there is a way of reducing this significantly by getting the 80% permanent army professionalism perk, which reduces that by 50%. But you still want to be able to minimize the unnecessary morale damage, as otherwise those regiments won't be fighting for as long as they possibly can, and the chances of you losing that battle will increase. So now that we've covered cannons, I will just quickly cover the other, cannons and infantry. I'll cover the other one, which is obviously the cavalry. Typically, cavalry, it's a slightly different in single player and multiplayer. In single player, I do like to keep around, if we have a look at my Tunis game, I like to keep around maybe 2k cavalry per stack, as you can see here, and as you can see here. The reason for this is because of the flanking bonus which cavalry receives. Look, I'm not really going to go too much into it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. When your combat width is longer than the enemies, you can use your cavalry to flank them, and then you essentially take less damage and you deal more damage. So I like to use that a lot in single player. However, in multiplayer, realistically, cavalry are typically never ever useful. So the reason is because you'll pretty much constantly have your entire front line filled out, and so there's no real benefit from getting the cavalry. Now, not only that, but they also cost more money, and frankly, they often don't even deal as much damage. Like, for the cost of 1 cavalry, you could be hiring almost 3 infantry. If you have a look at their upkeeps, you know, that's a 0.19, so it's about 0.2, and that's almost 0.5, so it's almost 2.5 infantry for 1 cavalry in upkeep. Add on top of that the fact that if you have, say, for example, more cavalry than infantry, you'll also be taking the penalty to your tactics as well, which further increases and reduces the efficiency It increases the casualties and reduces the efficiency of the troops that you are then fielding. Now, there are two main exceptions to this, I would say, which is Poland and hordes. They're the only two real countries that can afford to take cavalry in the later game. And there's a very specific reason for that, which is if you go to their idea groups, you'll see that they have the winged hussars, which gives 33% cavalry combat ability. Combine that with quality and you got 43, and then take espionage and aristocratic, and what is that? Where is it? 10%, so you're looking at 53% cavalry combat ability, as well as cavalry cost and regiment cost as well. So you're looking at minus 20% there on top of that. So if you're playing as Poland, or alternatively a horde, I'm just trying to think of what their tag is. I think that should be here. So they also get 20% cavalry combat ability, so not as good. Again, you know, my personal favorite has always been Poland for this strategy, but in that case, you can actually rock cater more cavalry into the later game, but I would still always suggest having that full 25 cannon backline as soon as possible, because again, only cannons are able to utilize that back row of damage, and so if you're not utilizing it, you're basically just wasting. You're taking more damage, you're dealing less damage, and you're also not even really saving money either, because the fact that, you know, replenishments are expensive, man. You're saving manpower by using those additional cannons. So there you go. So essentially, my typical army stacks will, I would say, honestly, look around 32, because if we go down to here, you get down to tech 16, seeing that's an extra 5, which is putting you at 30, and 18 is 32. So my typical siege stacks will end up being around 30 to 32, and then obviously 32 again for the cannons, and then obviously I'll have infantry stacks of around 20 to 30,000 as well for my supporting stacks. Now, the next point I want to cover is morale versus discipline. So, obviously, look, you do have the infantry combat ability, cavalry combat ability, artillery combat ability. They're pretty important. I would suggest specifically ICA and artillery combat ability due to obvious reasons. My personal favorite is I would take 10% artillery combat ability over 10% infantry combat ability. Sorry, I messed that up. I meant I would take 10% infantry over 10% artillery, because obviously the fact that these stats are higher. Now, the other big, you know, verse is discipline versus morale. So first of all, this is pretty much objective when I say this. Discipline is better for late game, and morale is better for early game. So morale essentially gives two things. It lets you stay in the battle longer, and it also typically increases the chances of you stack wiping small stacks, which is a big part of why it's better in the early game, because you're much more likely to be stack wiping early on than later on in the game. And so because of that, the morale is much more useful there. Discipline, on the other hand, reduces the damage you take and increases the damage done. And so that is one of the big reasons why it's better late game. When you have 400,000 men charging in a battle against each other, 5% discipline, that's not just, a couple thousand. You could be talking about the difference between 40,000 losses with just 5% discipline. So it's very, very good late game. But I would also personally say that morale is better early game than discipline is better late game, if that makes sense. So that's one of the big reasons why defensive ideas is such a common early game idea, because that early 15% morale is a very huge benefit, as well as obviously like you got your fort defense and all that junk. But the main reason is for that 15% morale, because that's a very significant increase, particularly in the early game. Now, I would personally say that I am a discipline over morale guy, but that's because I prefer to play towards the late game, whereas I understand that a lot of people would rather be aggressive in the early game, particularly, for example, taking out players. You definitely want to be looking more towards that morale side. So, it's really a matter of perspective, but also, additionally, you have to consider if you're focusing morale over discipline, you'll also be wanting a lot more manpower, as whilst say a particular increase in morale may be equal to a particular increase in discipline in regards to the chances of you winning the battle, you'll also be taking significantly more casualties as well. So you do need to consider that fact when you decide which one you'd like to go. So, for example, a morale Muscovy, or a morale Russia, should I say, would be much stronger than, say, a morale Italy. Now, ignoring all the other factors, obviously Russia has a significantly larger manpower pool, and so because of that, they can afford to take those extra losses that Italy can't. So that's definitely something that you need to consider when you're deciding on which one you'd rather play with, is, not just morale or discipline, but also the manpower that you possess as well. And, naturally, you can also take, your manpower out of the professionalism too. So, again, keep that in mind. Now, next thing I'd like to just have a quick talk about is policies. I've already gone over ideas, but just a bit of a quick thing is when you are fighting a military conflict, specifically against players, make sure you are running as many military-based policies as you can. 10% morale can make the difference between losing and winning. You need to make sure you're running all 3 of those military policies, or 4 if you have an extra slot. Just make sure you're running as many as possible that directly benefit your troops. Yes, you'll be spending mil points, and that is unfortunate, but it can mean the difference between you losing and completely, being destroyed out of the game, and you winning. Okay? You being kicked out of the game by getting fully annexed is not worth saving a few military points, because you'll never get to spend them anyway. So always keep that in mind. Make sure you're running as many military policies as you possibly can when you are fighting in an important life or death conflict. I feel like a lot of people just seem to forget that fact. Anyway, look, I will just be covering 2 more topics. Now, first of all is forts. So be sure to place your forts strategically, okay? If you go to your geographical map mode and you see a mountain province that is located near to one of your enemies, you want to be loading up those provinces with forts. Because if someone is, say for example, Castile decides to march in from Granada and onto Malaga and start sieging down this fort. If, while they were sieging down this fort, I was to send this stack to attack them on Malaga, because of the fact that they are sieging out a mountain fort, the terrain penalty benefits the attacker, because it is my fort. So if they are sieging out a Tunisian fort and Tunisian troops attack them whilst they're sieging out that mountain fort, that the Castilian troops or the besiegers will be the ones receiving the negative effects of terrain. And so because of that, you will essentially get a +2 on your dice roll. So, when you're fighting wars, and if you get a nice solid mountain fort position, hold that for dear life, because you will not get a better opportunity to defend your land. Drop on the damn defensive edict, okay? Never forget to put on defensive edict on your fort provinces, okay? The enemy will not get the bonus for that fort defense when they are occupying that one province. So always put it on when possible, because 33%, okay, that's 33% defensiveness, okay? If you've already got 50%, you're turning that from a 45-day siege into a 55-day siege. And if that's a level 2 fort and they haven't got any cannons, they could be sitting on that thing for over a year, during of which you could have been attacking them for the entire time and absolutely demolishing their manpower. Okay, so keep that in mind. Mountain forts are king in multiplayer, and don't forget to use your defensive edicts. Hell, frankly, if Castile was at war, I would literally just state this. I wouldn't even core it, okay? Don't even bother coring it, because you don't need to core the state to be able to run the defensive edict. You don't even need to core it. It'll still get the bonus. See? It's not cored. It's a territorial core. You will be paying a little bit of extra maintenance for it. I think it's like, what? You know, it's okay, so you're paying 0.36 ducats a month for an extra 33% defensiveness on a mountain fort. Don't chicken out. Use that to your advantage, okay? I can't stress enough how disgustingly overpowered mountain forts are. Particularly if you're making the maximum use of them. Hell, even if you're not maximizing the use of them, they're still really powerful because they already get a flat, you know, a flat 25% defensiveness. So keep that in mind. Alright? Now, last of all, I'm just going to cover the naval combat side of things. Alright? When it comes to Navy, the important number for Navy is morale. Okay? Look, you can have your naval combat with, alright, it doesn't change. It stays at the base of 30 for the entire game. The only way you can increase it is with, you know, like, I believe there's an event or two that might change it. You can get the maneuver on your admirals will increase the combat width. So this little one right here, I can't remember exactly how much it decreases it by per point, but it does increase your naval combat width. But the main reason that you want, you know, the main thing that you want in fighting as a navy is morale, because of the fact of how naval combat works. Okay, once a ship takes significant damage, it will attempt to retreat. Now, whilst it is retreating, it still takes up damage, and it still takes up combat width, and it still takes damage. And that's only once its morale drops low enough. So if you have better morale on your ships, not only will they fight for longer, but they won't be wasting your combat width. Because again, after their morale drops low enough, they'll attempt to retreat, they'll be taking up a combat slot, they won't be fighting back, and they'll still be taking damage. That's the big reason why morale is king in the naval combat. Alright? And obviously the two main boats to know for combat is heavy ships and galleys. If you're playing in England or a France or a Portugal, you want heavy ships. If you're playing something like the Ottomans or Italy, you want galleys. Because all this is inland sea, where galleys are twice as efficient. And obviously this is, you know, all open sea, in which heavy ships have the most damage output. So if you are going for a proper combat navy, I would suggest a minimum of 30 heavy ships. If you don't have 30 heavy ships, don't even bother, because 30 heavy ships will fill up the base combat width. And obviously the same goes for galleys as well. You go 30 galleys or 30 heavy ships. You know, as you can see here, they take up 3 times. Alright, they take up 3 times the combat width of, you know, of light ships, except look how many guns it's got. It's got more than 3 times the number of guns. Got about, you know, 2.5 times the hull size. And it also has more hull strength, if I recall correctly. Give me 1 second. Like, if you hover over them, you can see the benefits that it gets. Yeah. Anyway, those are the main points that I really want to cover in this one. I don't think there was anything else that I particularly thought of. If there is, I might make a follow-up video, but we'll see. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/TwinsPlayTech. Link will be in the description down below, as well as be sure to head on over to my Discord if you have any questions. Alternatively, you can also message me on Twitch, you know, when I'm live. Just send me, you know, flick a message in the chat. Hey, take it. blah 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 blah. How do you do this? I'll I can still answer questions even if I'm not playing EU4, because obviously I'm the best variety streamer OCE, so I do play multiple games. The other option is to just drop it down in the YouTube comments below, and I will happily answer. I pretty much read every single comment because obviously I don't really get a lot, so so anyway, I really hope you guys have enjoyed. Again, I might be making 1 to 2 more of these, probably 1 tops, and then I'll be looking at the potential for making more advanced guides. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Peace.